landing zone sites, and we have special criteria for where they actually land to ensure that we're able to get the crew up and out of the water and into the medical bays essentially within an hour after splashdown.
Our next one comes from Mark. Who wants to know, can they take over from the computer and do a manual splashdown? They can. Required. Initiating a deorbit or an emergency deorbit is one of the capabilities available to crew members. You would have to be in a pretty extreme situation to do that.
Something we're obviously not in today.
Is everything's gone really smoothly with Dragon. But that is something that's available to them. They also have the capability to manually step in for a number of the different steps during the re-entry, mainly for any parachute deployments or even cutting the parachutes after they've splashed down. That doesn't happen automatically. They have a button right in front of them on their displays where they can make that happen. So they do have quite a bit of capability to jump in if required.
That is one of the few hardwired buttons on their display panel, but it is certainly not one that can be triggered accidentally. It is a two-step verification lever, essentially. So no need to worry about performing an emergency deorbit accidentally.
Next question comes to us from NASA plus space equals heart.
I couldn't agree more. Will this Crew Dragon be reused? Yes, it will. This particular capsule is intended to be reused on the Crew 2 mission, which will be launching sometime next year. We already have plans for reuse for it. In fact, the team at the Cape is already preparing to begin those refurbishment processes as soon as the capsule lands, essentially really getting a head start on that. The capsule is waterproof. That was a process that we learned how to do through the Crew Cargo program, our reuse efforts with that program. Version of the Dragon capsule, also known as Dragon 1, the process of making that waterproof that knowledge that we learned from that has transferred over to Crew Dragon capsules, and it's safe to say that it is with very little refurbishment required to the internal hardware. There's very little refurbishment required because we're able to keep it watertight and eliminate any exposure to salt water, which for metallic surfaces does cause corrosion, which is no good for spaceflight. So short answer is that, yeah, we will be reusing this as soon as next year on the NASA Crew 2 mission.
All right, our next one from Lisa. What are Bob and Doug bringing back from ISS, if anything? There's quite a bit, actually. They have about 150 kilograms, or a little over 330 pounds of cargo, essentially strapped to the ground right underneath their seats. The lion's share of that is utilization or science samples. A lot of it cold stowage samples that's kept in powered freezers. Those samples coming from a range of biological, biomedical studies, a lot of them with the astronauts themselves as the test subjects. As cargo return, a pretty critical capability as we execute a lot of the science on station, but we need to return a lot of the samples for analysis down in labs here on Earth, and they're going to be bringing a lot of that down. They're also returning some vehicle hardware items that have either malfunctioned or just passed their service life and need to come home or get inspected. And then a couple of their personal items, things like their sleeping bags are coming back with them. And they also have a couple of special items we've touched on a few times, including that tremor dinosaur that was chosen by both of their sons as their zero-G indicator for this mission, and the flag that was left there by Doug Hurley and his fellow crewmates of STS-135, the final space shuttle mission. That is coming home. It's been up there for just about 9 years, and it will fly again when we send humans around the moon in the not-too-distant future. And I know we haven't seen it, but I have heard that Little Earth is also coming back. I almost forgot about that. Little Earth was the zero-G indicator on Demo 1 and remained on station after that mission, and it's pretty sure it was packed away to come home on Demo 2.
I think you're right. So right now, Dragon is currently flying over the far South Pacific Ocean. We have a nice little map here to show you of our ground tracking. So there you can see it on your screen. If you're curious, the yellow indicates where the capsule is in daylight. The red part of the line indicates where it goes into eclipse, or whenever it's basically hiding in Earth's shadow. So right now it's in daylight. Bob and Doug must be getting some pretty spectacular views as they're completing their suit-up process. But at this point, we're going to take a quick break and leave you with our lovely ground map here.
Dragon SpaceX for video.
Go ahead.
Yeah, request to come back aboard when y'all are ready.
We are ready for you to come aboard.
Outstanding, and work. Dragon SpaceX, you are go for procedure 4.011 suit leak check.
Suit check-in work.
Okay, so we just heard the crew now stepping into suit leak checks. As we've described a few times, this is when they're actually going to pressurize their suits that they wear for launch and entry, and really any of the dynamic phases of the mission. So they'll completely zip up and seal the suits, and then flow nitrox in to confirm.
Dragon into decimal 2, we are ready to pressurize.
Dragon SpaceX, you are go to pressurize.
So Bob Bankin and Doug Hurley getting the go. They're going to pressurize their suits. So pressurized nitrox now going to flow in. Again, these suits are, we have confirmation the leak check is in progress. So these suits are worn as just another line of defense to help protect the crew members from the harsh environment of outer space. If they were to experience a cabin depressurization, any kind of poisonous leak in their atmosphere, or even a fire, these suits are designed to protect from all of those different instances. So the suit leak check is pretty standard. Anytime before we get into one of these dynamic operations, we just want one more check to make sure that the suit is ready to go in case it's called upon. And so they'll pressurize now and flow some nitrox, some nitrogen and oxygen through their suits. They'll look for it to maintain a constant pressure. And then once that's done, they'll depressurize the suits and they'll leave the zipper open. They'll typically leave one zipper just unzipped a little bit when they're not pressurized. They'll still have cool air flowing through. In fact, they'll do what's called a suit purge just before we do the deorbit burn. So at the same time, they flush the cabin atmosphere itself with some cool down air. They'll flow some cooled air through the suits just to help regulate the temperature, the cooling effect inside the capsule, just to make sure the environment stays at a comfortable temperature for them, while the Dragon capsule itself heats up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So we got about a minute left in this suit leak check. We'll wait for the results on that, and we'll just be one more box checked on our way to the upcoming trunk set, deorbit burn, re-entry, and splashdown. And one interesting thing to note, if you're watching this ground track, you're going to start to see that line coming out of the bottom left corner and ending in the Gulf. That means we are on our final orbit. And so Dragon's basically on its last lap around planet Earth, the last 90 minutes it's going to spend until we just about get to that splashdown. So you can keep an eye on that. The line's going to stop moving where you can see it terminate in the Gulf.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nominal leak check.
Copy, show the same.
So there a minute ago, we had confirmation of nominal leak check. Again, that's just checking another box off on the to-do list as Bob and Doug continue their return home back to planet Earth. Up next, we will be making sure that the nitrox system is safed and that we're able to proceed into the next phases of our descent to the the Gulf of Mexico. We are aiming for a splashdown site just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Right now, our recovery ship is en route to that designated location zone, and it will be there ready and waiting for Bob and Doug to splash down. There on your screen, we do have a live shot from Go Navigator. Again, that's our recovery ship located in the Gulf of Mexico. You can get a little bit of a feel for that wave action that we got there. Generally speaking, pretty calm looking based on the waves that we can see there in the shot. And yeah, so we're excited to be able to welcome Bob and Doug back home. Just checking my timeline quickly. Their landing will be coming up in just under 2 hours. We're looking at an hour and 57 minutes. That will be happening at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time, 18:48 Universal Coordinated Time. Before we get to their water landing, we have to perform a couple of steps prior to that. If you've been following along with us this morning, you're probably very familiar with this. But for perhaps those of you who have joined in within the last few minutes, at this point we are exactly an hour away from the next physical milestone that needs to be completed prior to Dragon Endeavour's return to planet Earth. Those activities will begin with claw separation. The claw is what connects the umbilicals, the power, the telemetry, the fluids between the Dragon capsule and its trunk. In order to expose the heat shield in preparation for Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere, we need to jettison the trunk. It will disintegrate upon entering the Earth's atmosphere itself. So once we separate that, we're now able to step into what's called slew to deorbit burn attitude. That's essentially maneuvering the capsule into position to perform the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is where we fire the 4 Draco thrusters that are located at the top of the capsule near the forward hatch. We call those the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. It'll last about 11.5 minutes. That deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon in its final trajectory to the exact landing location. So like I said, that'll be about 11.5 minutes long. After that burn completes, we want to close the nose cone and lock it up. Like I said, that's where the forward hatch is located. And since these capsules are designed to be reusable, we definitely want to protect those thrusters and that hatch, because that is the hatch where the astronauts going in and out of the International Space Station. So once we have that nose cone locked it in place, we then begin to enter the Earth's atmosphere.
And SpaceX for deorbit burn brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, for timing, I'm showing no changes. Your tablet and onboard times on your timeline are within about 1 minute or less of our ground estimates. How copy?
Copy. Timing on board is per the iPads and within a minute.
And even better, the onboard countdown in your timeline should be within a few seconds. So looking pretty good. For the vehicle, Endeavour is looking great for entry. The ready comm during Bob's comm check earlier, we consider temporary, and we are not tracking any system issues. How copy?
Endeavour's in good shape and good comm from the PLT.
Okay, as far as recovery goes, Go Navigator is just about at the in position, so within a few kilometers. In addition, the WB is airborne. Recovery team is go at this time.
Go for recovery. Copy all.
Yep, and one quick go back. Recovery has arrived, so they are on station. In addition, for the weather, I'm looking at the weather right now from the water video from Go Navigator, and it looks like glass. It's awesome. The latest splashdown forecast, though, is winds at 2.25 knots, wave height less than a foot, and a 6-second period. How copy?
Copy. Winds, waves, and weather.
All right, so there we heard the deorbit briefing. This is basically the opportunity that the Corps here.
Okay, Doug, that's all we got for the burn brief. We'll talk to you shortly before deorbit sequence start.
Copy all. Thanks, Mike.
And correction there, we'll have the go, no-go for you shortly. That'll be the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the burn briefing there, just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Since Bob and Doug's primary role during re-entry is to monitor telemetry, timing, and data, it is important to make sure that they're on board time with the with what we're seeing down here in mission control. So all really good stuff there. We also heard that the recovery vessel Go Navigator is in position.
Next couple of minutes, really the next hour is really where things start to happen. But we do have a couple of moments now to get joined by a special guest.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for the deorbit burn, and the burn has been enabled.
That's a great call to hear.
Denver copy. Go for the deorbit burn, and we see it on board.
All right, so we just heard it. That means both the SpaceX and NASA teams are go for deorbit burn. So we are counting down to that deorbit burn. Still a bit of a ways off. It's just under an hour from now from starting for that 11.5-minute burn. But for now, as we are go for deorbit and return of Bob and Doug, we're going to send it over to the Johnson Space Center real quick, where Courtney Beasley is standing by in Mission Control Houston, along with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, also there in Houston. Courtney?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, joining me in a studio here at NASA's Johnson Space Center is NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Jim, thanks for joining us today. Another historic day for our agency, returning humans to Earth in a commercially built and operated spacecraft. How is this mission paving the way for the future?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's really establishing the business model for the future. So you can see today I'm wearing my Artemis shirt. And when we go to the moon, we're going to go with commercial partners. And you know, NASA's goal here, we don't want to purchase, own, and operate the hardware the way we used to. We want to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. But we also want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation and safety, and really create this virtuous cycle of economic development and capability. And that's what today's return is going to represent. This is the next era in human spaceflight, where NASA gets to be the customer. We want to be a strong customer. We want to be a great partner, but we don't want to be the only ones that are operating with humans in space.
And while on board, Bob and Doug were, of course, conducting science experiments and spacewalks. And how are NASA's efforts on this station contributing to life back here on Earth?
So when we think about the International Space Station, it really is focused on how do we do those transformational activities that benefit human life here on Earth. And certainly, you know, when we think about advanced materials industrialized biomedicine. These are the things that we're developing every day. Some examples would include, as far as advanced materials, very, very thin materials like an artificial retina for the human eyeball. So somebody who has macular degeneration might not have to lose their eyesight in the future. We can only create materials that thin in the microgravity of space. We cannot do it here in the gravity well of Earth. But that's just one of so many examples. When we think about how we compound pharmaceuticals, when we think about how we create immunizations for things like salmonella and other diseases, these are capabilities that are available to us because of the resource that is microgravity. But advanced materials, things like very pristine fiber optic cables, we call it Z-band, for example. These are all things that we think that there is a marketplace for the future. So look, right now we're doing commercial resupply of the International Space Station. As of today, when Bob and Doug come home safely, we will be doing commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big thing is we need commercial space stations themselves. And in order to create the market for commercial space stations, we have to have these transformational capabilities that come from the microgravity environment. And that's really what we're developing right now.
And as you know, a big day for NASA today, but how about a big week? This week alone, we launched Mars 2020. Artemis 1's launch vehicle stage adapter was delivered to Kennedy Space Center. And here we are completing the first commercially crewed mission to the International Space Station. What are your thoughts on the state of the agency at this point?
So make no mistake, NASA's budget right now is the highest it's ever been in nominal dollars. And it's at $22 billion. The budget request that President Trump gave us that is before the House and the Senate right now is $25.2 billion. It's not just about sustaining capabilities like commercial crew, commercial resupply, the International Space Station. It's also about developing new capabilities so that the United States of America can stay the preeminent spacefaring nation. It's why we created the Artemis program to go to the moon sustainably with commercial partners and international partners to use the resources of the moon to live and work for long periods of time and then take all of that knowledge onto Mars. And of course, as you mentioned on Thursday, we launched another Mars mission. The most sophisticated robot that NASA has ever developed is right now on its way to Mars, and we're going to prove that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support. But there's so many other things. We're looking for life on another world. We're looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. We're talking about microbial life, but life nonetheless. And this is really a bright moment for NASA. I want to be clear, though. We need support from our members of Congress in both the House and the Senate. We need to be able to get that $25.2 billion budget that we have requested. And so I'm working with members of Congress and senators on both sides of the aisle every day, doing town halls across the country. We are in great shape. But in order to stay number one in the world, we're going to need the resources that the president has requested.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. Such an exciting day. And in case you missed it just moments ago, both SpaceX and NASA are both a go for deorbit burn. So with that, we'll send it back to Dan and Kate at Hawthorne for the latest.
All right. Thank you so much, Courtney. Great to hear from the administrator. And we're in it now. We're kind of in the final stretch. This is what I feel like we've been waiting for the last couple of hours. And it feels pretty great to be here.
Yeah, it certainly does. In this next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Bob and Doug home. As you've heard us talk a little bit so far this morning, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the assembly. We need to expose the heat shield in order to prepare the capsule for atmospheric reentry. So we will, there we got a nice view of Bob and Doug in their suits. This is the first time we've seen them in their suits and in their chairs this morning. So there they are tapping away, preparing to initiate the deorbit sequence. So let's talk a little, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like in the lead up in the last couple of minutes, we heard they had good suit leak checks. As Kate described earlier, once the leak checks are complete, they don't keep the suit pressurized, so visors are open. they're going to have cool air running through their suits and the cabin and just getting ready for the ride.
Yeah. Whenever they are re-entering the atmosphere, the external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal temperature of the cabin, however, will stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a couple of systems in place to keep it cool and comfortable for Bob and Doug as they are returning. Like Dan just said, there will be some cool air flowing through their suits. The cabin itself will also be purged with cooler air as well, so that will assist in making sure that the temperature stays pretty temperate inside the capsule.
And I mean, we're just 42 minutes and 50 seconds away from things really kicking up, and this is going to be when we really start to do that first maneuver to get ready to jettison the trunk, and then we'll do that claw and trunk separation. And then it's time for just kind of that final firing of those engines, that really just that downhill ride.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters, there are 4 of them, 4 of those Draco thrusters there at the top of the capsule near the nose cone. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. This burn is what will essentially give Dragon its final trajectory back home. This is the last burn that the capsule will perform. If you've been following along since yesterday afternoon, you know that there have been a number of burns completed. This deorbit burn will be the final one. It will last about 11 and a half minutes. After that burn completes, we no longer need to utilize those Draco thrusters, and we want to protect the forward hatch up there, so we close the nose cone and lock it up. We're expecting that event to happen at 11:11 a.m. Pacific. About 10 minutes, or excuse me, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, wow, mental math on air is hard. 25 minutes after that, the capsule will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and like I mentioned, approaching about 3,500 degrees, and that's because
we're in that heat of re-entry, and so that's where things will really heat up for Bob and Doug on their re-entry, and that's where we'll have that comms blackout. And we actually have a Twitter question that's germane to this right now, where Stephen asked, during the blackout, will you not be able to communicate with Bob and Doug, but you will be able to track them? And it's kind of a mix. We won't be able to talk to Bob and Doug. We won't be able to send or receive any data from the Dragon spacecraft. So we won't have basically telemetry-driven tracking, but we know exactly where they're going to be as their orbit's already been calculated. We've had this orbit calculated since yesterday, essentially. It's gotten fine-tuned as we've done those burns. But we'll know exactly where they're supposed to be, even though we can't communicate during that time.
Exactly. And even though we won't be able to send or receive signals or commands or telemetry, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous. At that point, it is driving itself anyway, so there's really nothing to be worried about. Bob and Doug's primary function at that point is to monitor all of the telemetry that they see on their screens and to stay comfy.
Yeah, and once they're through that, that initial entry, we'll have that part called entry interface, which we kind of explained as that's when the capsule's really experiencing aerodynamics. They've been flying around in the vacuum of space with no air, so no lift, drag, stuff like that on their capsule. And entry interface is where they're really starting to hit the atmosphere, and it's affecting the capsule. And it'll continue to use its Draco thrusters in the service section to really guide it back home.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of guiding it back home, here come the parachutes. At 11:44 a.m. Pacific or 18:44 Universal Time, we're going to be deploying the drogue parachutes. Drogue chutes are utilized for a couple of reasons. One, to continue to further decelerate the vehicle and also to stabilize it. Like Dan said, it will be experiencing some of those aerodynamic pressures, and so we want to make sure that the capsule is well and stable before we deploy the main parachutes. Those main chutes will be deploying at 11:45 a.m., and there will be 4 of them. Those will essentially deploy, and it takes a couple seconds for them to fully inflate, so it might look a little funny at first, but we assure you that they are working properly, and it just takes a couple seconds for the air to continue to catch in them and for them to fully expand to their large, rounder shape. So after those chutes deploy, it only takes 3.5 minutes for Bob and Doug to splash down. That'll be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. And like we've mentioned before, our splashdown location is off the western coast of Florida. We're aiming for a location near Pensacola. Our recovery vessel Go Navigator is currently in location, ready and waiting for splashdown. They're actually going to be waiting about 3 nautical miles away from that splashdown point.
Yeah, we got the call that they were on station. We also got the call that the NASA WB-57 airplane is in the air, and we've actually seen a couple of brief spurts of video. That's the airborne asset that we'll have. That WB-57 is a high-altitude research plane that NASA flies. It's outfitted with a number of imaging cameras. The main one that will be seen is an infrared one. If you watched the Demo 1 splashdown, which I'm sure you all did, you were able to see that first, and this is actually a glimpse of that WB-57 camera. We'll be getting this back, and if we acquire it the same time we did for Demo 1, we were able to see the capsule while it was still in that atmospheric reentry, so it was just this really bright light that all of a sudden lit up the sky, and that was the first view we got of Dragon. And so we'll use that to hopefully see during the entry, and then the initial parachute deploys, and then we'll have a couple more assets on the ground or on the water, on the boat, that will get a couple more views of Dragon as it delivers Bob and Doug safely to the ocean.
Yeah, so as you can hear, all of this excitement will be happening in pretty rapid succession. On your screen now, we can see closest to the camera, we have NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. He is the pilot or the commander for this particular mission, and then there now on the camera to the right is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. We are very fondly looking forward to bringing our space dads home this morning. And it looks like we mentioned before, that'll be happening in about an hour and a half. Again, targeting splashdown for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. But like we mentioned before, the action really begins at the claw separation milestone, which is slated for 10:51 a.m. Pacific in about 38 minutes from now. So, again, we are continuing to take questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from F1 Fanatic. Do the astronauts need to have face masks down during re-entry? That is a great question. Very astute observation that those visors are in the upward position. So right now, these suits are unpressurized, and Bob and Doug are breathing just the normal cabin air. Those face masks, or visors as we refer to them, do need to be lowered and locked during the re-entry period. We need the spacesuit to be fully enclosed during the more dynamic elements of operations, and certainly the re-entry period is one of them. So we'll actually at one point during the deorbit burn preparation phase, we will actually hear communication between ground station, from ground here, Mission Control Headquarters at SpaceX, to Bob and Doug, just to confirm and double check that those visors are in place where they should be. Our next question comes to us from Philip. Where exactly are the parachutes stored before deployment?
They are stored in 2 separate compartments on the Dragon spacecraft, on a side of the vehicle that has a deployable panel. The drogue parachutes are stored in the the upper part. It's called the upper bulkhead, and they're deployed by 2 drogue motors or mortars. So pyrotechnics that are fired to actually deploy those drogue parachutes. Just further down the panel, kind of at the base of the spacecraft, is where the 4 main parachutes are stored. And again, those get drawn out by the drogue chutes. There are redundant systems in place to make sure that if the first set of mortars don't fire, you have backups to get these chutes deployed. We're one fault tolerant on both the drogue parachutes and the main parachutes. So 1 out of 2 drogues and 3 out of 4 mains is what the vehicle's been rated and tested to. SpaceX has done a tremendous amount of testing on these parachutes, even within just the last several months in the lead up to the mission. As parachutes, obviously a very critical part of the reentry, and this is something that is very meticulously packed and documented before the start of any mission. and NASA assisting SpaceX, as we have some experts who have been involved in parachute missions for decades. But the parachutes are stored under deployable panels, and we'll see them basically fire open as the parachutes come out and deploy at the different altitudes.
Yeah, those panels are basically located above and below the side hatch panel. So if you are looking at the Dragon capsule, the anchor point for those parachutes will ensure that the side hatch will effectively be as far away from the ocean surface as possible, ensuring that we're able to expedite the process of egressing Bob and Doug from the capsule and the whole recovery process as a whole. Great question.
All right, our next one comes from Scott. He wants to know, what are the tablets on their legs used for? What kind of devices are they? I think you've heard him call out a few times that they're using iPads on board, and they're really just essentially their user manuals. They're able to dial up different procedures, checklists, things that they're looking for throughout their flight. They're able to Velcro them essentially to their suits, and just like the main displays in front of them, they're touchscreen enabled, and they have the touchscreen capable gloves in their suits. It's really just another information source. Dragon doesn't have the big paper manuals that we were used to in the shuttle era and things like that, just kind of streamlining everything as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we mentioned before, this is a demonstration mission, and so Bob and Doug's job here is to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So a lot of what they're doing is going to simply be monitoring, well, not simply, paying attention can be, especially whenever there's a lot going on dynamically around you, is staying focused can be tough. So it's not an easy job what they have coming up, but they will essentially be responsible for monitoring all the data and telemetry that is being received on screens. And part of the debriefing that will happen once they get back on land is quite simply, was there anything that happened in reality that you weren't expecting or differed from what you were instructed would occur? So making sure that in the future fully operational missions that we have, starting with Crew 1, launching later this year, that those crews are fully prepared and that we make those, essentially those instruction manuals that they do have access to as perfect as possible. Because it is essential that we have correct information and that the crew is informed and aware of all the operations that are going on, regardless of whether or not they're not the ones necessarily commanding, because the vehicle is autonomous, but it is important that they do know what's going on.
All right, our next question comes from Sam. Might be the most important one of the day. Wanted to know if Bob and Doug can listen to the SpaceX webcast when they're inside the Dragon capsule. I mean, I certainly hope so. It's not like they have too much else on their mind.
Right.
No, they're not able to listen to us, but one kind of fun fact that always kind of makes us geek out a little bit is the crew members on board the space station will usually get NASA TV pumped up to them anytime their crewmates are launching or landing. So they're able to watch their friends and former crewmates as of just a few hours ago return home. So Chris, if you're watching, hi.
Great question. Another one comes to us from Ruhr Rocker. Does the Dragon capsule have windows where Bob and Doug can look out? Absolutely. Actually, one of my favorite pictures that Doug Hurley has posted on Instagram to date was actually one of the first pictures he posted at the beginning of this mission, was a shot of what he could see outside of Crew Dragon's windows. There is a window located on either side of the side hatch, and it certainly will provide visual confirmation that re-entry is happening. Like Dan mentioned before, they'll be able to see a little bit of the energy that's being expelled during the re-entry period. Some of those pieces of the ablative material, as they heat up and are designed to flicker away, they'll actually be able to see that from the windows themselves. So it'll be quite the fireworks show.
All right, our next one comes from Joe. Wants to know, does the Dragon capsule have Netflix? Another important question.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. As our views here of the capsule cycle through, we'll be able to see what their screens look like. There we go. So there in the center screen, we actually have the ground tracking map. As you can see there, actually it might be kind of hard to make out, but Dragon is actually crossing over the Atlantic Ocean, now approaching what looks like England and Ireland. So it will be crossing over into Europe soon. And also on those screens to the left and the right of that ground track screen were their telemetry screens. So those will be the interface that they use during the deorbit burn, and that's what they'll essentially use to make sure that everything is looking good and performing nominally.
Yeah, and I mean, that center screen that you just saw, that's essentially the same map that we've been looking at throughout our coverage here today. So they're looking at a lot of the same data that we're trying to give you guys down here on the ground. Just where are they over the Earth? Because it can be a little disorienting to look out the window and figure it out quickly. But they're able to see just how far along their orbit they are, where those milestones are coming up. So they can just, again, they're in a monitor mode and they're ready, locked and loaded to jump in if required. Our next question comes from Roshan, who 7-year-old Ian wants to know, why is the Dragon capsule cone-shaped? For a very specific reason, and it's why a lot of spacecraft are in the capsule shape. When they were trying to really figure out the most efficient way to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, both from handling the trajectory without having wings like a space shuttle, starting over. When they were really first trying to figure out how to best shape a spacecraft to efficiently and effectively re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in the safest configuration, where they essentially landed on was a cone shape. Or a capsule shape. There were very initial drawings that you could find all manner of spacecraft that were put into wind tunnels, but at the end of the day, all the way back in the early days of spaceflight, when we were in the Mercury and the very early days, they were able to determine that the capsule shape was really the most efficient. That shape of heat shield dissipated the heat the best, was the easiest to control, and was really the safest option. And physics haven't changed since the 60s, at least not a great deal. So that's why you still see a lot of capsule-shaped spacecraft, and it's really just for re-entering an atmosphere. Good question.
So there on your screen, again, we have live shots coming from Dragon Endeavour as it is making its way back towards Earth. We are approaching the final steps of the day, of the mission, in fact. And at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:18 a.m. or p.m., excuse me, Universal, we will have the splashdown of Dragon Endeavour. So right now, Bob and Doug are essentially cycling through, preparing for what we call deorbit burn initiation. This will be where the deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory to a specific landing location. That location there were 7 possible ones. We determined the best one for today's re-entry to be off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. The recovery vessel Go Navigator is in place, ready and waiting. And it seems like Bob and Doug are pretty comfortable there. They are in their spacesuits. The leak check has been performed, and we got the call out that it was nominal, so everything good there. Right now, those visors are in the up position. They will be closed and locked whenever we get into the dynamic portion here upcoming in just a few minutes. Checking my timeline here.
We're just about 24 minutes and 20 seconds from things really picking up. That's when we'll start to get into the attitude to separate the trunk, and just about 8 minutes after that is when we'll start the deorbit burn. And again, that'll be the longest burn of Dragon's return journey the latest timeline we got had it lasting for about 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It'll be the last firing of those forward bulkhead thrusters. The 4 Dracos at the very top of Dragon that'll eventually be covered up by the nose cone following the deorbit burn. And as we've said before, that deorbit burn is what commits them to coming home. When that happens, that capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that'll put them essentially on a collision course with planet Earth. It lines up their orbit to intersect with that splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we have just a few more minutes until we get to that, we still have some questions coming in. Again, if you have one, jump over on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes from Scarif Survivor, who wants to know, does Dragon lose radio data contact with satellite or ground stations during re-entry? And the answer is really everything. As that plasma builds up around the spacecraft, it essentially prevents signals being sent or transmitted or received by Dragon's antennas around the outside of the spacecraft. So it's both satellites and ground stations that it won't be able to communicate with. But again, Dragon continues flying itself. We know what its orbit is plotted out to be, so we know where it is, and we even know the expected time of that comm blackout in about 6 minutes. So it does lose contact with everything. We won't be able to hear from Bob and Doug until they're on the other side of that blackout, and then we'll reestablish communication with Dragon. All right, we have another one from Nettie Banda. Wanted to know how many seats are in Dragon.
So as you can see on your screen there are actually, I guess one is hidden, there are actually 4 chairs there available. We will be utilizing all 4 seats on the Crew 1 mission launching later this year, currently targeted for September. Right now, Bob and Doug are only occupying 2 of them, as this is a demonstration mission. So yeah, we will be utilizing all 4 of those seats in future missions, but as of right now, I believe it was on the launch portion of the mission, one of those seats was occupied by Tremor, who, if you've been following along, is the sequined dinosaur that was voted on by the 2 sons from Bob and Doug as what should be the 0G indicator. So Tremor was strapped into a seat during ascent, and when they got the okay to release him, he started floating into the capsule and gave us its sequined glory there on the edge of space.
All right. Well, again, just another time hack as we're coming up on these. We're just a little over 20 minutes from the start of all of our deorbit burn sequencing starting. So we're looking at that to really pick up at about 10:48 as we'll start getting into the attitude for trunk separation. And then we start basically executing a bunch of steps that are going to commit Bob and Doug to this re-entry.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. It'll be quite the journey. Now, of course, with respect to the deorbit burn, Bob and Doug will remain in their seats and strapped in for the entire duration. In fact, they won't be exiting those seats until they're able to egress or exit the capsule after it has splashed down and been recovered out of the ocean and safely resting in the nest of the recovery vessel. Along that note, our next Twitter question is from Brett. The question is, what is the orientation of the astronauts when seated? As in, do they face the front or the top of the capsule, and do they find it comfortable? Great question there. So in the views that we just had a couple minutes ago, they were, I guess what we would call in the reclined position. They were facing towards the top of the capsule. During the launch portion, whenever they were actually getting into the capsule, back in late May, the seats were actuated in the down position where they were facing towards the hatch. The angle of difference is about 40 degrees between the two positions. They actuate in order to make sure that whenever there are G's being experienced, that it is in the most comfortable and safely ergonomic way possible. So that's where seat or actuation comes in handy. Also, it also helps them to get in and out of the capsule. It's a little trickier whenever the seats are in the up position or when they're reclined facing upward toward the top of the capsule. As for comfort level, I've heard that they have found it pretty comfortable. The seats are actually custom fitted for each astronaut destined to be flying in it. So whenever a crew member is assigned to a mission, they will also be assigned a seat specifically. So there will be no mid-flight fire drills where everyone is switching seats. Everyone has a designated seat. They're essentially small, medium, and large, and the armrests are also customizable depending on how long the crew member's forearm is. So we have taken many steps with comfort in mind, as well as style. You've seen those spacesuits. They look pretty good in my opinion, but those spacesuits are also similarly custom fitted for each individual crew member. So with the combination of the custom fit of the suit as well as the custom fit of the seats, we have aimed to make it as comfortable as possible in the event of some sort of situation where we need to wave off an activity for up to 48 hours. That's a long time to be in a confined space, even if you are highly trained like these guys. So yeah, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible while inside the cabin was certainly high priority.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. This one deals with kind of hygiene on the space station. Just curious how the astronauts that have been on station a while, how do they stay so clean cut? I know there's not a barber on board. Do they cut their own hair? It just looks clean cut. Do they shower, do laundry? How do they do it? They do have to cut their own hair. Even the current commander, Chris Cassidy, who's still on board, famously shaved his head once as his fellow crewmate Luca Parmitano was about to arrive on space station, just so he had some bald company. But they do have trimmers on board the International Space Station that have a vacuum attached to them, so they're not just getting hair just all throughout the cabin, as like everything else, hair would just tend to float around and get caught in the drafts of the air circulation on board. So they use basically vacuum cutters in order to give themselves haircuts. So that's how they're able to do it. No professional stylists up there, but they're able to make do and stay a little less shaggy.
Quick time check here as we just passed 10:30. It's now 10:32 here in California. We are less than 20 minutes away from our first event here on our list as Bob and Doug begin to continue to check off the boxes of their return home. That first event is claw separation. That's essentially the initiation of trunk jettison. All of that means that we will need to unlatch the claw from the trunk. That is the mechanism that holds and connects the trunk to the capsule, delivers fluid, telemetry, power, all that good stuff. We need to expose the trunk in order for the capsule to deorbit. So we will jettison the trunk and then we will begin a deorbit burn a couple minutes later. That deorbit burn is slated to begin at 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 18:56 Universal Coordinated Time. So in just under 23 minutes, we're expecting that to start. Once again, if you're just joining us, we've got some live views inside the Dragon Endeavour capsule. Bob and Doug there in their seats as they are making final preparations and doing final reviews as we get ready to initiate the deorbit sequence. closest to the camera there is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and further away from the camera is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. These are two incredibly wonderful humans. We affectionately call them our space dads here at SpaceX. It's been such an honor to be able to fly them. Of course, Doug Hurley was actually the pilot of the final space shuttle mission, STS-135, back in 2011. And honestly, when I heard that he was assigned to this mission, I cried because, just to have the opportunity to return the pilot of that final mission to the space station in this capacity is so cool. And I've loved following this mission since the moment that we started training for it here in Hawthorne.
Well, we know that they're ready. They've done all of their suit checkouts, everything to get themselves to this point. And once we begin these events, they're going to keep a very close eye. As again, crew is always in the loop to step in. But Dragon going to be executing all of these different maneuvers and separation events automatically via a pre-programmed timeline. We're continuing to count down. We'll have our first maneuver in a little under 13 minutes. We're a little over 15 minutes from the claw separation. That claw connecting the service module to the Dragon capsule itself. A series of quick disconnects will retract, cutting off any of the fluid and data paths between the two. And then shortly after that, just a few seconds later, the trunk will separate. And then we will be just less than 5 minutes away from that deorbit burn. Again, deorbit burn expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Now, of course, during re-entry, Bob and Doug will be experiencing a couple of Gs. We're anticipating them to feel about 4 Gs during re-entry. This will make it a little difficult for them to move their arms around. Not impossible, but essentially what they're doing right now is reviewing all of the event details for splashdown, making sure that and I've said this before, they have rehearsed this both they've rehearsed the sequence of events in person with the recovery team, as well as through simulations here at Mission Control, or at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So at this point, because it will be difficult for them to maybe flip through to the exact part of the procedure they might want to review during the actual re-entry event itself, they are reviewing those now in preparation for that splashdown, or for the re-entry sequence.
We've got another Twitter question. This one from Laura Mountain. This one's pretty cool. Is it quiet in the Dragon, or does it sound like an airplane? Well, it doesn't sound like an airplane, at least not right now, as they're still flying through the vacuum of space. There's none of that rushing air. They'll get some of that once they're further down during their descent. And then they're also able to hear when the Draco thrusters fire. And one of the really cool things they've done to train the crew is SpaceX had a number of microphones placed throughout the cabin during that Demo 1 flight last year. And they were able to record what it sounded like inside through all of the major burns, the launch, the descent and landing, everything. And in the trainer upstairs here at Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, they have speakers set up where, as they're doing simulations or practice runs of the different phases of the mission, they're able to hear what it should sound like inside Dragon as they're going through that. So I know that's one thing Bob pointed out is one of the things they're looking for is, does this sound like I was expecting it to? Does this look like, is that a light I'm supposed to see? All of those different things that for them is like reflex by the time they've trained it this much. right, well, at this moment, we are less than 10 minutes away from this sequence starting. We are just about 9 minutes away, in fact. And first, we'll see that maneuver where we'll get into the proper attitude or point Dragon really in the right direction for the claw and trunk separation. We're essentially going to do a 90-degree yaw maneuver, turn Dragon sideways to make sure the trunk goes out and away, not coming out in front of or behind the capsule, essentially re-entering the atmosphere with the capsule. We're going to avoid that. And then Dragon will position itself for the deorbit burn. It's going to point those forward bulkhead thrusters into the direction that it's currently traveling. This is called a retrograde maneuver, and this is done specifically to, we're going to slow the capsule down, but more than anything, we're changing the perigee or the lowest point of the capsule's orbit. Again, essentially putting it up on an intersection point with that spot in the Gulf where we're coming home. Eight minutes, Kate.
We are getting close.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit sequence.
Go ahead.
All right, Doug, we are 5 minutes out from deorbit sequence start. In addition, just wanted to inform you we are expecting some RADI-COM during claw and trunk sep due to vehicle orientation.
Okay, copy. We see 4:45 left for the slew, and then RADI-COMs during the claw sep.
Good read back, Doug.
Kate, we are almost 4 minutes away from this starting.
Yeah, we just heard the call out there, confirmation from SpaceX Core down here at Mission Control to Crew Dragon that we now under 5, but at the time of the call, 5 minutes away from deorbit sequence start. So like we've been mentioning before, that deorbit sequence will involve separating from the trunk and performing the deorbit burn. As you may have noticed on your the ground tracking map that we've been showing you before, Bob and Doug were in their last orbit around Earth. I can't remember what the number was that you quoted earlier, Dan, but they have done thousands of orbits around Earth during their 2-month duration on station. So it is really exciting that the line that we see on that trajectory map is no longer fully around it. They're coming home.
We're not seeing two lines showing what their next orbit is going to be. They are on their final orbit of planet Earth, and this is their 1,024th orbit around our planet since they launched back in May of earlier this year. So we're counting down. We're under 3 minutes away from that first maneuver, and that's going to be a slew, as you heard Doug radio down. And that's essentially, we're going to change the attitude. We're going to use those Draco thrusters to essentially spin Dragon about 90 degrees to the side so we can jettison that trunk. And that'll be done in the 2 stages. We'll do the claw separation and then the trunk separation. 2 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. This is where things really pick up. This is where we really commit to coming home. And this is where we're in kind of the final stages of Bob and Doug's trip in outer space. And pretty soon we'll be seeing them in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, well, they are staying comfortable and continuing to monitor data and telemetry in the vehicle. Dragon is actually doing a couple of things itself to prepare for this deorbit sequence. Again, it's doing these things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system loops from the radiator. This is the system that will help keep Bob and Doug cool while they are re-entering the atmosphere. Like we've said before, the external temperature will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and that thermal control system is what helps keep them cool during that time. Also, Dragon is initiating the separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate the data, the power, and the fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk. So right now, the vehicle is preparing to execute that, and we are anticipating execution of claw separation in 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So, we've been here for 10 hours,
couple hours.
I think, at this point. The webcast as a whole has been going on for almost a little bit less than 24 hours. So, we're in the final moments here as Dragon is beginning its journey home to bring Bob and Doug back to Earth.
Yeah, this is the moment that Dragon is in the position to start coming home. The recovery team's already on station. They have been for a while out there off the coast of Pensacola. We are less than a minute from starting all of these carefully choreographed sequences to essentially split Dragon in half, get rid of that trunk so we have the capsule, point the heat shield back down towards Earth following that deorbit burn, and then we bring them home. We are just about 30 seconds away now from maneuvering Dragon to get ready to get rid of that claw first, and then that trunk separation. There will be about a 35-second difference or 35-second jump from separating the claw to separating the trunk, and we'll keep our eyes on the ground track for you and make sure we get kind of exact locations of when these separation events are occurring. We're looking for both the claw and the trunk to separate cleanly, and then it'll be less than 5 minutes until we do the deorbit burn.
Yeah, and after that, it'll...
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
All right.
Great news.
Never copied.
All right, so the Draco thrusters on Dragon starting to fire. It's now moving its way over to the trunk jettison attitude. We should be about 2 minutes away from the claw separation.
For those of you that are just tuning in, you are just in time. At this point in the mission, we are now beginning to execute the final steps of Dragon Endeavor's return to Earth. Right now, we are performing the claw separation slew, which basically means Dragon is maneuvering itself into position, into the proper attitude in order to separate the Dragon trunk. And that will be initiated first by separation of the claw. The claw is the mechanism that attaches the trunk and the and the capsule together. The claw is what delivers power and telemetry and fluids, and we need to expose the heat shield. Right now the trunk is blocking that. So we will jettison the trunk, and we will then have allow us to maneuver into the proper attitude to perform the deorbit burn, which Dragon has performed a number of burns so far overnight and early this morning. And this will be the final burn that the vehicle has to perform for this mission.
And we just heard confirmation Dragon's in the trunk separation attitude. We are now standing by for claw separation.
And we just heard confirmation of claw sep.
And with the claw separated, we're now standing by for the trunk separation in less than 30 seconds. Ten seconds till trunk separation.
And we just heard confirmation of trunk separation.
The trunk separation coming at 10:52 a.m. Pacific, with Dragon flying over the Indian Ocean just off to the west of Australia.
Dragon SpaceX, we showed nominal trunk jettison.
Oh yeah, we felt it.
All right. So the crew just got the call, nominal trunk separation. That's exactly what we were looking for. Next up is going to be that deorbit burn. Again, this is the longest burn of their trip home. This is the longest firing of those thrusters, and the last time we're using those forward bulkhead thrusters.
Exactly. Those forward bulkhead thrusters, like Dan just said, that's what we're using to perform the deorbit burn. Once we do that, we will then be able, that deorbit burn will last for 11.5 minutes. Once that is completed, we don't need to use those thrusters anymore, so we will close and lock the nose cone in preparation for re-entry.
So we're a little under 3.5 minutes from the start of the deorbit burn. Again, our sequence of events has started. We're able to separate that claw at 10:51 a.m. Pacific. At 17:51 GMT or Universal Time. And then at 10:52, just a minute later, the trunk separating while Dragon was flying just off to the west of Australia. So claw separated, trunk separated. Next up, deorbit burn.
Yeah, right now, Dragon is running exclusively on battery power now that the trunk is separated. Also, right now, telemetry is looking really good for the vehicle. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. Like I said before, that nitrox system, which is essentially the air that we breathe every day down here on Earth, nitrogen-oxygen combination, a mixture. It's the same stuff that they put in your scuba tank if you are a scuba diver. The nitrox system is used to cool the cabin and the suit to keep the crew comfortable during the re-entry phase. They will actually have cold air flowing through their suits themselves, as well as through the cabin itself. So a two-pronged approach to maintaining a comfortable temperature there inside the capsule. Like we said, the next event that we have coming up will be the deorbit burn, which we're expecting that to commence in 1 minute and 40 seconds. According to the ground tracking map there, Dragon is approaching the southwestern coast of Australia. We are less than a...
We're excited.
Jinx.
We are inside a minute to deorbit burn. And again, one more time, this is the long one. This is expected to last 11 minutes, 22 seconds. This is that burn that commits the Dragon to re-enter in the Earth's atmosphere. And you can get kind of a sense of just how far they're going to go. By the time they fire this burn, they're just going to be off to the southwest of Australia. And this is going to realign their orbit to intersect with that point off the coast of Pensacola where they're going to be splashing down.
Yeah, this is the moment where Dragon is fully committed to the re-entry point. Again, we are aiming for just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Our recovery ship Go Navigator is ready and waiting to begin the recovery process right after splashdown occurs. Once again, if you're just joining us, we are now in the final steps of the deorbit sequence. The deorbit burn will be starting here in just a couple of seconds.
And we just heard confirmation deorbit burn has begun. That coming at 10:56 a.m. Pacific. Again, while the Dragon spacecraft just off the southwestern coast of Australia. So here we go. 11 more minutes to go.
I'm ready, and I'm sure it's safe to say that Bob and Doug are ready. They've done a number of interviews over the last few weeks while they were on station, and just the excitement and the enthusiasm for the mission is palpable. Just the opportunity to be able to fly these two incredible humans to the International Space Station and back is such an honor, and we're just really excited to get our space dads home safely and back to their families as quickly as possible. This deorbit burn that we are currently in, it will last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Already a little more than a minute 10 in counting, so we have about 10 minutes to go. Just heard a call. The propulsion system performing nominally. That's the word we always want to hear. We always like to hear. So just under 10 minutes to go left in this burn.
And all within the last 10 minutes. Again, it seemed like we had slow progress of events all morning, and then boom, within the last 10 minutes, we had a couple of things happening. Dragon maneuvered itself into the appropriate position to jettison its trunk, and it did so successfully, nominally, and then it initiated the deorbit burn just a couple minutes ago. Like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire, forward kind of meaning at the top of the capsule. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered Earth's atmosphere, but this deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site in the Gulf of Mexico. right now, although we can't see it at the moment, Bob and Doug are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance is remaining until that deorbit burn terminates. So Dragon is flying itself, so all they really have to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. So while this burn is completing, again, we're just a few minutes into it. It'll last 11 minutes and 22 seconds. We have a couple more events coming up afterward in, let me check my timeline here real quick. In just under 44 minutes, we will have the initial parachute deployment. So that is essentially when we will be deploying the drogue parachutes, the small parachutes that are designed to further slow down the capsule as it is re-entering the atmosphere, as well as stabilizing it. And then a minute after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes, and that is targeted for 11:44 a.m. Pacific, 18:44 Universal. And then just a couple minutes after that, we will have splashdown. So again, that's all in just under 44 minutes. Right now, we are performing the deorbit burn.
We've got a little over 7 minutes left in this burn. And the only performance call we've gotten so far is everything's still looking good with the propulsion system on Dragon. Once this burn completes, we will have kind of a couple minutes, about 3 minutes to catch our breath before things pick right back up and we get the nose cone closed. And then there'll be a bit more of a gap, and at that point, they will maneuver Dragon to its entry attitude, essentially heat shield pointed down and into the line of velocity, and that heat shield protecting them from the heat of reentry. Temperatures getting up to about 3,500 degrees on the Dragon spacecraft. But everything looking good. We're about 5 minutes into this deorbit burn. Again, it started right at 10:56 a.m. Pacific time, 17:56 GMT. Dragon was flying about 260 statute miles just off the southwestern coast of Australia.
So right now, during this burn, we just heard a call that we're halfway through the burn and everything is looking great, everything performing nominally. During this burn right now, Bob and Doug are currently monitoring the deorbit tool, which, like I said earlier, captures things like the perigee, the reentry interface, how much distance remains before the burn itself is terminated. They're also monitoring the burn duration and the firing of those Draco thrusters located there at on the forward bulkhead of the capsule. There on your screen, you actually can see what Bob and Doug are seeing right now. That is that tool on their screen. So on the left and the right of the center screen, that is the deorbit. That is the deorbit monitoring tool.
Just past 7 minutes into the burn, a little over 4 minutes remaining. Everything's still looking good with Dragon Ship Endeavor's deorbit burn to commit it to coming home. Everything continuing to be on track for our splashdown. Again, our splashdown time right at 11:48 and 24 seconds Pacific was the calculated time. It would be typical if we're a couple seconds on either side, but that time is 18:48 GMT or Universal. But we're already through several of the really major steps to initiate this re-entry. The claw is separated, the trunk is gone, the deorbit burn has begun, and we're more than halfway through, just a little under 3.5 minutes remaining.
There on your screen is a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where the Dragon operators and mission leaders are there monitoring Dragon's progress. They continue to watch the propulsion data and all the GNC data, making sure that everything is looking healthy and nominal.
We're just about 2 minutes, 30 seconds until the end of this burn. We'll listen for the call out up to the crew on the performance of the burn, and then they'll start moving into the next steps. Again, we'll get about a 3-minute breather before the next major milestone comes up when we get ready to close the nose cone, that protecting the docking ring, guidance, navigation, and control sensors, and also these 4 forward bulkhead thrusters that are currently performing the deorbit burn during the actual re-entry process. So we are at just under 2 minutes from the conclusion of the deorbit burn.
Again, Dragon is committed to its splashdown point. There is no going back.
Yeah, we already have the recovery team ready and on standby. They've been there for quite some time now. Here, and we have about 90 seconds left in the burn. Weather looking great at the splashdown site off Pensacola. Winds just around 2.5 miles per hour. Sea being described as like glass by the Corps here in Hawthorne, radioing up to the crew. Ended up getting fantastic weather for this first crewed splashdown of Dragon. We are 1 minute away from the end of deorbit burn.
Again, this burn is placing Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing site off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida. That is in the Gulf of Mexico. And our recovery vessel, Go Navigator, and the recovery team are ready and waiting to see Bob and Doug come back through the atmosphere. Like we said, this deorbit burn, during this deorbit burn, they're not actually re-entering the atmosphere just yet. That won't happen for about another half hour or so. This is essentially just lining up Dragon on the right course to that splashdown site.
Yeah, still in an altitude of about 254 statute miles over planet Earth. We are coming up on 10 seconds from the end of the burn, so we'll stand by and wait for the call out to the crew on the burn performance.
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete, performance nominal, nose cone closure initiated.
Nominal burn, nose cone in work.
All right. Deorbit burn complete. We heard the call. Nominal burn. Bob and Doug are on their way back home. This burn commits them to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. All we have left now is to wait. That was really one of the last major moments before they start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We'll have the nose cone closure coming up next. That should be coming in just a couple of minutes, as we had about a 3-minute span between the end of the deorbit burn and that moment.
Yeah, the nose cone is actually currently in the closing process, so it doesn't just snap shut. It does slowly close and lock. So right now, that nose cone is in the process of moving back into the closed position, and we will hear the call out for whenever it has fully closed and whenever the latches have secured.
Seeing some data, it looks like it's about halfway there. It's opened a little bit more than 90 degrees. I think the exact count was 110 degrees opening range or range of motion for the nose cone. So we're a little more than halfway now to getting that nose cone closed.
So I have just heard that we have a visual on nose cone closure. So it'll take a minute for the hooks to close in. They close in a series. So the first series will close and then the second will follow, and that'll take about a minute to complete.
All right, well, as we just wait for the finish to that nose cone closure, we'll have a bit of time again. We'll have about 20 minutes, or a little over 21 from right now, until we really start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We're expecting that entry interface in about 21 minutes, and then right around that time, we'll also be looking for that blackout we've been talking about. We've had a little bit of what we call Radicom at this point, so you'll hear kind of some sporadic interruptions in the audio transmission just because of how Dragon was oriented for the trunk jettison and for the actual deorbit burn. But that blackout period will be due to the plasma that builds up around the capsule, interfering with those antennas either sending or receiving data.
So I've heard the call out that the first set of hooks for nose cone closure are in motion. So this will complete in 2 sets. The first set is now in motion. So really good news to hear that. Everything looking good so far. Like I mentioned before, in the background, Dragon has inhibited the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete that deorbit burn. This is to ensure that it's safe to latch that nose cone shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox purge. Nitrox is simply a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. It's what we breathe, and the nitrox that is being purged into the system is cooled, so allowing that cool air to circulate around the cabin, but also inside of Bob and Doug's suits will help to keep them cool and comfortable during re-entry, which will be coming up in about 20 minutes. We're currently tracking 23 minutes and 20 seconds until entry begins. So in case you're just joining us at this point, the nose cone has closed. The forward thrusters have been disabled, and we are latching the nose cone. Currently underway with the first set of hooks. The first of 2 sets. And we just had confirmation that the first set of hooks is closed, so now the second set will begin to close as well.
As we mentioned, after this nose cone's fully closed, we'll have a couple of minutes to catch our breath again, about 20 minutes or just under 20 minutes until Dragon will start to maneuver itself to the entry attitude, essentially pointing the heat shield in the direction of travel as it's going to be leading the way through their reentry through the Earth's atmosphere. We'll look to run into that communications blackout at about 36 minutes after the hour, expecting that to last for about 6 minutes, and then we'll get that back shortly before we deploy the drogue parachutes, followed just less than a minute later by the main parachutes, and by that point hopefully we should have some views of Dragon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and parachuting to a splashdown in the Gulf.
So there in the front row of Mission Control in the center, you can see CEO Elon Musk and our President Gwen Shotwell sitting side by side at those center consoles. In addition to those two, the room is filled with Dragon operators and mission leaders who are continuing to monitor the health and telemetry of the crew and the capsule. Right now, nose cone closure is underway. The first of 2 sets of hook latching has completed. And we just heard a call out that the
SpaceX nose cone is secure for entry.
Copy. We see it on board.
All right, great confirmation there. Back and forth from Mission Control here to Bob and Doug up in Dragon Endeavor. That Bob and Doug have also confirmed on their displays that the nose cone has closed nominally and it is secure for entry.
All right, so that nose cone close completion